The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, crashing against the marble floor of the Capital Grille in a symphony of shattered crystal. 8 years. 8 years of marriage, and Michelle chose our anniversary dinner to deliver the news that would end everything I thought I knew about my life. The golden liquid spread across the polished stone like spilled secrets, reflecting the warm restaurant lighting that suddenly felt cold and harsh against my skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. David, aren't you going to say something? Michelle's voice cut through the ambient chatter of other diners celebrating their own milestones. Her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, a gesture that would have filled me with joy just moments earlier. Instead, it felt like watching a stranger perform an intimate act meant for someone else.
Ow.
The waiter approached with practiced discretion, beginning to clean the mess I'd created, but his movements felt distant and muted. Everything around me had taken on that surreal quality you experience during a car accident, where time stretches and contracts simultaneously. Michelle's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the white tablecloth, her engagement ring catching. The light with each tap, that ring I'd saved for 6 months to afford, working double shifts at the consulting firm while she built her marketing agency from the ground up. The baby is healthy, she continued, her voice taking on that businesslike tone she used during client presentations. Ryan has been so supportive through the morning sickness. He's already talking about converting his spare bedroom into a nursery. Her words hit me like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. Ryan, her business partner of 3 years. The man she'd insisted was just a friend whenever I'd mentioned the long hours they'd spent together. The weekend strategy sessions, the business trips that seemed to multiply as their agency grew. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse and unfamiliar. How long? Michelle tilted her head, playing innocent. How long what, David? How long have you been sleeping with him? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Around us, other couples continued their romantic dinners, oblivious to the destruction happening at table 12. She had the audacity to look offended. David, you're being dramatic. Ryan and I have a connection you wouldn't understand. We're building something together, something bigger than just a business. This baby represents our future, our shared vision. She spoke about their affair like it was a merger, clinical and calculated. The restaurant's anniversary special sat untouched between us, the candlelight flickering across Michelle's face as she outlined her plans like she was presenting a marketing campaign. She and Ryan had apparently been planning this conversation for weeks, strategizing the best way to tell me. They'd even discussed living arrangements. Ryan's house had better schools in the district, she explained, better for raising children. I'll need you to sign the house over to me, she said, pulling out a folder from her purse with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Ryan thinks it's better if we handle this transition smoothly. No need for lawyers or messy divorces. We can be adults about this. The papers were already prepared. Divorce documents, property transfer forms, even a pre-written statement about irreconcilable differences. My signature line highlighted in yellow, waiting for my compliance. 8 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents she'd clearly had prepared by her attorney weeks ago. I stared at the papers, my mind struggling to process the calculated nature of this betrayal. This wasn't a moment of passion that had spiraled out of control. This was premeditated, organized, executed, with the same attention to detail Michelle brought to her most important client campaigns. I was being fired from my own life. You planned this, I said, the realization hitting me with crystal clarity. The restaurant, the anniversary dinner, even the timing. You've planned all of this. Michelle's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Ryan thought it would be poetic, ending one chapter on the anniversary of when it began. New beginnings require clean endings, David. The waiter returned, asking if we needed anything else. Michelle ordered dessert like nothing had happened, chatting about the restaurant's famous chocolate lava cake, while I sat there feeling like my entire world had been demolished. She even asked for extra whipped cream, her appetite apparently unaffected by the destruction she'd just orchestrated. My phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, I glanced down to see a photo from Ryan showing him assembling a crib in what I recognized as his spare bedroom. The message read, "Can't wait to meet our little miracle." Michelle picked the perfect name, Our Little Miracle, their baby, their future, their everything that didn't include me. The weight of complete betrayal settled over me like a heavy blanket. 8 years of marriage, and I'd become nothing more than an obstacle to be removed efficiently. Every late night, Michelle had claimed to be working every weekend business trip. Every time she'd accused me of being paranoid or controlling when I'd questioned their relationship. It had all been real, and I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie. Michelle reached across the table, her touch feeling foreign against my skin. "David, I know this is hard, but we can handle this maturely. Ryan and I both think you deserve to find someone who appreciates you the way you deserve to be appreciated." The condescension in her voice snapped something inside me. She was dismissing 8 years of marriage like it was a failed business venture, offering me consolation prizes while she moved on to her upgraded life. The pregnancy announcement wasn't just about informing me of her affair. It was about establishing ownership, making it clear that she and Ryan were building something permanent while I was being written out of the story entirely. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing Michelle's face. The woman I'd married wouldn't have orchestrated something this cruel. Or maybe she would have, and I'd just been too naive to see it. Maybe the Michelle sitting across from me was who she'd always been, and I'd been living with a performance, designed to keep me compliant until she was ready to upgrade. The dessert arrived, and Michelle dug in with enthusiasm, occasionally glancing at her phone to text updates to Ryan. She was already living in her new life, treating our marriage like a concluded business meeting. I sat there watching her eat chocolate cake while planning her future with another man. Our 8-year relationship, nothing more than a line item to be finalized. The check came, and Michelle reached for it with a smile. "Let me get this," she said. "Consider it a farewell dinner. Ryan's already made reservations at that new French place downtown for next week. He's so thoughtful about these romantic gestures." Walking out of that restaurant, I felt like I was moving through water. Everything seemed muted and distant, the sounds of traffic and conversation fading into background noise. Michelle chatted cheerfully about her plans for the baby nursery, completely oblivious to or uncaring about the devastation she'd just caused. She'd accomplished her mission with the precision of a military operation, and now she was ready to move on to the celebration phase. The drive home passed in silence. Michelle scrolling through her phone while I navigated the familiar streets of Denver that suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming. Every landmark we passed carried memories of our life together, memories that now felt tainted and false. The coffee shop where we'd had our first date, the park where I'd proposed, the neighborhood where we'd bought our first house together. All of it felt like evidence of a lie I'd been living. Our house in Highlands Ranch looked exactly the same as when we'd left it 3 hours earlier, but everything had changed. The family photos lining the hallway now felt like props in an elaborate deception. Michelle had been playing house while building a real life somewhere else, and I'd been the unknowing supporting actor in her performance. She headed straight for the bedroom to change clothes, calling Ryan to give him a detailed report of how the dinner had gone. I could hear her laughing through the closed door, sharing intimate jokes about my reaction, probably describing the look on my face when the champagne glass fell. I stood in our living room, surrounded by 8 years of accumulated memories, and realized that none of it had been real for her. The house felt like a museum dedicated to a relationship that had ended long before tonight's official announcement. Every piece of furniture we'd picked out together, every photo from vacations and anniversaries, every small domestic detail that had felt like building a life together. It was all just set decoration for a life Michelle had been ready to abandon. The moment something better came along, I found myself in our home office, staring at the computer where Michelle had spent countless hours on video calls with Ryan, planning their agency's future while planning the end of our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd been conducting her affair in the same space where I'd worked late nights to help support her business dreams. I'd been funding my own betrayal, working extra hours to give her the financial freedom to explore her options. The pregnancy changed everything. This wasn't just an affair that could potentially be worked through with counseling and commitment. This was Michelle choosing to build a permanent life with someone else, creating a human being that would tie her to Ryan forever. There was no coming back from this, no possibility of reconciliation or second chances. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. The next morning, Michelle left early for what she called a prenatal appointment, though she mentioned Ryan would be driving her. I stood at the kitchen window watching her get into his silver BMW, the same car that had been parked in our driveway, countless times over the past year. How many of those visits had been about business, and how many had been about building the relationship that led to this pregnancy? After they drove away, I found myself moving through our house like a detective. In my own life, 8 years of marriage had created countless hiding spots for secrets. I was determined to understand how long this deception had been building. The home office felt like the logical place to start, given how much time Michelle had spent there during her supposed late-night work sessions. Her laptop was password protected, but I knew Michelle well enough to guess her patterns. She'd always been practical about passwords, using variations of important dates and names. After 3 attempts, I gained access using a combination of Ryan's name and what I suspected might be the date they'd first slept together. The fact that it worked felt like another small betrayal, confirming that their relationship had become significant enough to warrant its own digital commemoration. The browser history told a story I wasn't prepared to read. Hotel reservations for business trips that had included romantic dinners for 2, shopping searches for men's cologne and expensive watches. Most damaging were the saved draft emails that had never been sent. Passionate love letters describing their connection and future plans. One draft, dated 6 months ago, detailed Michelle's excitement about wanting to start a family with Ryan, discussing how they would handle telling me when the time was right. 6 months ago, she'd been planning this pregnancy while lying in bed next to me every night. 6 months of calculated deception while I'd been completely oblivious, working extra hours to support what I thought was our shared future. The timeline was staggering. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. This had been a long-term strategy. I discovered a hidden folder labeled Future Plans that contained documents I never could have imagined. House listings in Ryan's neighborhood with notes about school districts and commute times. Research about the best time to announce a pregnancy for maximum workplace protection. Even a preliminary budget for divorce proceedings, including estimated costs for attorney fees and property division. Michelle had been treating the end of our marriage like a business project, complete with timelines and financial projections. The most devastating find was a series of photos from what appeared to be a romantic getaway to Aspen last month. Michelle had told me she was attending a marketing conference, showing me the registration confirmation and complaining about having to network with difficult clients. Instead, she'd been on what looked like a baby moon before the baby had even been conceived, staying at a luxury resort and posing for couple photos with Ryan against mountain backdrops. My phone rang, interrupting my digital archaeology. It was Jake, my best friend since college, calling to ask about anniversary dinner plans. He'd been encouraging me to plan something special for Michelle, even suggesting I surprise her with a renewal of our wedding vows. The irony of his timing was almost cosmic. "How did it go last night?" Jake asked, his voice full of enthusiasm. Did she love the surprise? I found myself unable to explain the reality. Instead, I told him we needed to talk and suggested meeting for coffee. Jake had always been perceptive about relationships, often seeing things I missed. I wondered if he'd noticed signs of Michelle's affair that I'd been too trusting to recognize. An hour later, we sat in a Starbucks on 16th Street Mall, the familiar noise of the coffee shop providing cover for a conversation I never thought I'd need to have. Jake listened without interruption as I explained the previous night's revelations, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to something resembling grief. "Man, I'm so sorry," he said finally. I had no idea. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jake hesitated before speaking. "Michelle always seemed committed to you," he said, shifting uncomfortably, "though now that you mention it, I did see her a few times around town with some guy. I figured it was work-related. He never said there were issues. His offhand comment stung more than it should have. Even my closest friend had unknowingly seen Michelle with Ryan and hadn't thought twice. I wondered how many others had watched her play the doting wife in public, while quietly building a life with someone else. How many people had smiled and asked about her pregnancy while I remained in the dark. Jake, ever protective, offered solutions: confront Ryan, hire a pie, prepare for divorce. But oddly, I felt calm, detached, even, like I was witnessing someone else's life fall apart. "What are you going to do?" Jake finally asked. I didn't answer right away. Outside the cafe window, people moved with purpose, unlike me, lost in a life that no longer made sense. The typical advice would be to fight for the marriage: counseling, ultimatums, saving what's left. But Michelle's pregnancy changed everything. She wasn't just cheating, she was building a future, a family, with someone else. I couldn't bring myself to fight for a person who had quietly replaced me. The woman I'd fallen for wouldn't have betrayed me like this. Either I'd misjudged her entirely, or she had become someone I no longer recognized. In either case, our marriage had been a lie. "I think I'm going to disappear for a while," I told Jake. He looked worried. "Like a vacation, you might? Want to hold off on big decisions while things are still raw?" But this wasn't about a break. It was about stepping away from a life that wasn't mine anymore. My job, our house, our shared friends, it all felt tainted. That afternoon, I called my boss and requested a leave. I had enough time banked to take several weeks off, and thankfully, the company was understanding. Then I searched for somewhere far enough from Denver to gain perspective. Asheville, North Carolina, with its mountain cabins and artsy solitude, stood out. I booked a small place deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, private, quiet, and far from anyone who knew me. That night, Michelle returned, glowing from her ultrasound with Ryan. She showed me pictures and spoke like we were old friends, sharing happy news. "He's already talking about coaching Little League," she said, beaming. "Can you believe we're going to be parents?" The way she said "we," as if I was part of this new chapter, was disorienting. I nodded, said what was expected. But inside, I was already gone. Lying in bed later, I listened as she whispered to Ryan on the phone, giddy about nursery colors and baby names. I realized she'd already moved on. I was just the final loose end in her carefully managed transition. 3 days later, while she was at another appointment, I packed my truck and left. No note, no explanation. It's just silence, fitting considering how long she'd been making plans without including me. The drive to Asheville was long, but each mile helped peel away the layers of a life I no longer wanted. When I arrived at the cabin, isolated, nestled deep in the woods, I finally felt like I could breathe. For a week, I hiked, read, and sat in stillness. My phone buzzed constantly at first. Michelle left voicemails swinging from rage to guilt to pleading. She accused me of being immature, then begged me to come home and talk. Her shifting tone revealed more about who she really was than our entire marriage ever had. Even Ryan left messages, which surprised me. He was calm, almost businesslike, urging me to cooperate to make things easier for everyone. He talked about Michelle's pregnancy like it was a project I was slowing down. I deleted the messages without listening to them in full. Whatever closure they wanted would have to wait. I wasn't ready, and maybe never would be. They'd spent months planning how to dismantle my life. They could spend some time wondering about my plans for rebuilding it. The mountain town of Asheville provided the perfect backdrop for reinvention. The community was filled with people who'd come there seeking fresh starts. Artists and writers and entrepreneurs who'd left behind conventional lives to pursue something more authentic. I found myself spending hours in coffee shops and bookstores, observing people who seemed comfortable with uncertainty and change. On my 10th day in North Carolina, I met Emma at a legal aid clinic where I'd gone to research divorce procedures. She was a family law attorney who volunteered her time helping people navigate complicated domestic situations. And something about her direct, no-nonsense approach to legal problems appealed to me immediately, unlike Michelle, who approached every conversation like a negotiation. Emma seemed genuinely interested in understanding the truth rather than managing perceptions. We started talking over coffee after the clinic closed. I found myself sharing details about my situation that I hadn't been able to discuss with anyone else. Emma listened without judgment, asking practical questions about assets and timelines, rather than offering platitudes about love and forgiveness. Her professional perspective helped me see my marriage's dissolution as a legal and financial process rather than just an emotional catastrophe. Your wife had her attorney prepare divorce documents before telling you about the affair, Emma observed. That suggests she's been planning this transition for quite some time. You might want to consider what other preparations she's made that you're not aware of yet. The suggestion prompted me to start investigating our joint finances from my laptop in the cabin. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Michelle had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into accounts with only her name. Small amounts at first, but increasingly larger transfers over the past 6 months. She'd also taken out a substantial loan against our house without my knowledge, using forged documents that included my supposed signature on the paperwork. The financial betrayal felt almost worse than the emotional one. Now, Michelle hadn't just been planning to leave me for Ryan. She'd been stealing from me to fund their new life together. The loan money had apparently paid for their romantic getaways and probably the down payment on Ryan's house upgrades for their future family. I'd been working extra hours to support a business that was being used to finance my own replacement. Emma helped me understand my legal options, explaining how to protect my remaining assets and document the financial fraud for potential criminal charges. Her professional competence was refreshing after months of Michelle's emotional manipulations and dramatic declarations. Emma dealt in facts and evidence, concepts that felt solid and reliable after living in Michelle's world of strategic deceptions. We began spending more time together outside of legal consultations, exploring Asheville's art scene and hiking trails that wound through the Appalachian foothills. Emma was recently divorced herself, having discovered her ex-husband's gambling addiction only after he'd bankrupted their joint accounts. Our shared experience of betrayal created an immediate understanding that didn't require explanation or justification. Unlike my relationship with Michelle, which had always required me to be someone other than myself, spending time with Emma felt effortless and natural. She appreciated directness and honesty, qualities that Michelle had always criticized as boring or unromantic. With Emma, I didn't need to perform enthusiasm for activities. I didn't enjoy or pretend to share interests that felt foreign to my personality. 3 weeks into my stay in Asheville, Michelle showed up unannounced at the cabin. I'd been careful not to share my location with anyone except Jake. But Michelle had apparently hired a private investigator to track me down. The sight of her rental car in my driveway felt like an invasion of the peace I'd been building. She looked different, more polished and professional than the casual clothes she'd favored during our marriage. Her pregnancy was beginning to show a small bump that she emphasized with fitted clothing and protective hand gestures. The visual reminder of her affair felt like a physical blow, confirming that her new life with Ryan was progressing while I'd been trying to process the end of our marriage. "David, this is ridiculous," she said, marching up to the cabin's front porch with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. "You can't just disappear because you're upset about the baby. We have responsibilities to each other, legal obligations that need to be handled properly." I remained seated on the porch swing, making no move to invite her inside or engage with her sense of urgency. The mountain air and weeks of solitude had given me a perspective that her presence couldn't immediately disturb. She looked small and out of place against the backdrop of ancient trees and endless sky. "Ryan and I have been discussing the property division," Michelle continued, apparently interpreting my silence as permission to proceed with her agenda. "We think the house should transfer to me since I'll be raising a child there. The mortgage is manageable with both our incomes, and it makes sense for the baby to have stability." The casual way she referred to both our incomes while standing on property I'd paid for with money she'd stolen felt surreal. Michelle was rewriting the story of our marriage to justify her actions, turning herself into the victim who deserved compensation for the inconvenience of my emotional reaction to her betrayal. "I've prepared a settlement offer," she said, producing documents from her purse with the same efficiency she'd shown at the anniversary dinner. "It's fair and generous," considering the circumstances. Ryan's attorney says these terms are quite reasonable for a no-fault divorce. The papers outlined a division of assets that left me with essentially nothing except my truck and whatever personal belongings Michelle deemed unnecessary for her new life. 8 years of marriage, and she was offering me the equivalent of a severance package for terminated employees. The house, the investments, even my retirement accounts would transfer to her in exchange for my agreement not to contest the divorce or pursue alimony. I looked at the woman I'd married 8 years ago and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time. This was who Michelle had always been underneath the performance of loving wife. Someone who viewed relationships as strategic opportunities and approached emotional connections like business transactions. I'd been useful to her while she built her agency and established financial stability. Now that she'd found a better opportunity with Ryan, I was being efficiently discarded with minimal compensation. "I need you to sign these today, Michelle," said, checking her phone with obvious impatience. "Ryan and I have an appointment with the real estate agent tomorrow to discuss modifications for the nursery. We can't move forward with our plans until this paperwork is finalized." The assumption that I would simply comply with her timeline, that I would sign away 8 years of my life because she'd found it convenient to move on, revealed everything I needed to know about how she'd viewed our marriage. I was a business partner being bought out, not a husband whose life had been destroyed by her calculated betrayal. I set the settlement papers on the porch table without looking at them, my eyes fixed on the mountain horizon where late afternoon clouds were gathering. Michelle shifted impatiently beside me, clearly expecting immediate compliance with her demands. The silence stretched between us while she waited for me to reach for a pen and finalize her carefully orchestrated transition into her new life. "I'm not signing anything today," I said finally, my voice calm and steady in a way that seemed to surprise her. Michelle's composure cracked slightly. "David, you're being unreasonable. This settlement is more than fair, considering everything that's happened. Most men in your situation would be grateful for such generous terms." The phrase "men in your situation" revealed how she'd been framing our divorce to Ryan, and probably to their shared attorney. I was the wronged party being offered charity, the discarded husband who should be thankful for whatever scraps she was willing to throw my way. The narrative painted me as pathetic and desperate, someone who should accept any terms rather than risk getting nothing at all. "What exactly is my situation, Michelle?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she'd justified her actions to herself and others. She looked uncomfortable with the direct question, her hand moving protectively to her stomach in the gesture that had become her default response to any challenge. You know what I mean? The marriage wasn't working for either of. Ryan and I found something real together, something you and I never had. The baby just makes it official. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. 8 years of marriage had been reframed as a mutual disappointment rather than a relationship I'd thought was solid until her anniversary announcement. She'd rewritten our entire history to justify her choices, turning herself into someone who'd finally found true love, rather than someone who'd conducted a calculated affair while stealing from her husband. "When did you first sleep with him?" I asked. The question hung in the mountain air like a challenge. Michelle looked away, focusing on her phone screen rather than meeting my eyes. "I don't see how that's relevant now. What matters is moving forward in a way that works for everyone involved." But it was relevant, and we both knew it. The timeline mattered because it would determine whether this was a recent mistake that had spiraled out of control or a long-term deception that had defined our marriage for months or years. Michelle's refusal to answer was an answer in itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, asking if I was available for dinner at a restaurant in downtown Asheville. The timing felt providential, offering me an escape from Michelle's pressure tactics and an excuse to avoid engaging with her settlement demands. I texted back that I'd meet her in an hour, then stood up from the porch swing. "I need to go," I said, picking up my truck keys from the porch table. Michelle's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't just walk away from this conversation, David. We have legal obligations to resolve." Ryan is waiting for confirmation that you've signed the papers. The mention of Ryan waiting for updates on our divorce negotiations felt like the final insult.
Ow.
My marriage was being managed by committee, with Michelle reporting back to her lover about my cooperation with their timeline. They were probably strategizing about pressure points and negotiation tactics, treating the dissolution of my 8-year marriage like a hostile corporate takeover. Tell Ryan he'll have to wait, I said, walking toward my truck. Michelle followed me, her professional composure dissolving into something rawer and more desperate. David, you're acting like a child. This divorce is happening whether you cooperate or not. The only question is whether we handle it amicably or whether you force us to take legal action that will cost everyone money and time. The threat was delivered with the same casual efficiency she used in business meetings, but I could hear the underlying panic. Michelle needed my signature to finalize her plans with Ryan, and my refusal to comply was disrupting their carefully orchestrated transition. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, I had leverage in our relationship dynamic. Toward Asheville, with Michelle's rental car following closely behind,
Oh.
her attempts to force a resolution making her appear increasingly frantic in my rearview mirror. The contrast between her controlled presentation of settlement terms and her desperate pursuit down mountain roads revealed the extent to which my cooperation was essential to her plans. Emma was waiting at a farm-to-table restaurant downtown, her relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to Michelle's high-pressure tactics. She'd changed from her professional attorney attire into casual clothes that suited Asheville's laid-back atmosphere, looking comfortable and genuine in a way that Michelle never managed even in her most unguarded moments. "Rough day?" asked, noting my expression as I joined her at a corner table. Before I could answer, Michelle appeared at our table with the determination of someone accustomed to getting her way through persistence. She'd apparently followed me into the restaurant, unwilling to let our conversation end without the signature she needed. The public setting didn't deter her from continuing her pressure campaign. "David, we need to finish our discussion," Michelle said, ignoring Emma entirely and focusing on me with laser intensity. "You can't avoid this indefinitely." Between us, with the sharp assessment of someone trained to read interpersonal dynamics quickly. "I'm Emma," she said, extending her hand to Michelle with professional courtesy. "You must be the wife David's mentioned." The introduction forced Michelle to acknowledge Emma's presence, but she clearly resented the interruption of her settlement. "Ambush. I'm Michelle," she said curtly. "David and I are in the middle of finalizing some important paperwork. Perhaps you could give us some privacy." The suggestion that Emma should leave so Michelle could continue pressuring me into signing her divorce terms felt presumptuous and entitled. Michelle was treating the restaurant like her personal office space, expecting strangers to accommodate her urgent need to dissolve our marriage on her preferred timeline. "Actually, Emma's a family law attorney," I said. "Maybe she could review your settlement offer and give me some professional perspective on whether the terms are as generous as you claim." Michelle's face went pale. The last thing she wanted was an independent legal review of her carefully crafted settlement terms. Her entire strategy depended on pressuring me into quick compliance before I had time to understand what I was signing away or seek professional advice about my options. "That's not necessary," Michelle said quickly. "Our attorneys have already reviewed everything. These terms have been approved by legal professionals." Emma smiled politely. "I'd be happy to take a look if David wants a second opinion. It's always wise to have independent counsel review any major legal agreements, especially in emotional situations where clear thinking might be compromised." The offer to provide professional review of Michelle's settlement terms shifted the power dynamic completely. Instead of being pressured into immediate compliance, I now had access to expert analysis of exactly what Michelle was asking me to. Sin. Her confident assertions about generous terms would be tested against actual legal standards rather than her word alone. Michelle's phone rang, and she stepped away from our table to take what was obviously a call from Ryan. I could hear fragments of their conversation as she explained that I hadn't signed the papers yet and was now consulting with an attorney. Ryan's voice carried clearly enough for me to catch. His frustrated tone and impatient questions about when they could expect resolution. Emma watched Michelle's phone conversation with professional interest. "She seems quite eager for your signature," she observed. That level of urgency usually indicates the terms favor her significantly more than she's letting on. When Michelle returned to our table, her demeanor had shifted from confident persuasion to barely controlled anxiety. Ryan had apparently provided additional pressure for her to secure my compliance immediately. Probably because their real estate plans and financial arrangements depended on finalizing the divorce quickly. "David, Ryan and I need an answer tonight," Michelle said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "We've been more than patient with your emotional reaction to this situation, but we have commitments and deadlines that can't wait for you to process your feelings indefinitely." The phrase emotional reaction to this situation made my betrayal sound like an over-response to minor inconvenience rather than a reasonable response to discovering that my wife had been conducting a long-term affair. While stealing money to fund her new relationship, Michelle was framing my need for time and legal counsel as unreasonable obstacles to her happiness. "I think David's request for time to review legal documents is entirely reasonable," Emma said with the calm authority of someone accustomed to dealing with high-pressure tactics. "Most people would want to understand exactly what they're agreeing to before signing away marital assets." Michelle's eyes flashed with irritation at Emma's interference in what she clearly viewed as a private negotiation. "This doesn't concern you," she said sharply. "David and I are perfectly capable of resolving our personal matters without outside interference." The dismissive tone Michelle used toward Emma revealed her approach to anyone who might complicate her plans. She'd probably spoken to me the same way for years, whenever I'd raised questions or concerns about decisions she'd already made. I'd just been too invested in keeping peace to recognize the pattern of dismissal and manipulation. Emma remained unruffled by Michelle's hostility. "You're absolutely right that this is between you and David," she said pleasantly. "I'm simply offering professional services if David chooses to use them. The decision about whether to seek legal counsel is entirely his to make." The calm professionalism of Emma's response highlighted the contrast between her respectful approach and Michelle's aggressive demands. One woman was offering support and expertise, while the other was demanding immediate compliance with her agenda. The difference in their approaches revealed everything I needed to know about which kind of person I wanted in my life moving forward. Michelle left the restaurant that night without my signature, her frustration evident as she stormed past other diners who turned to watch the commotion. Emma and I finished our dinner in peaceful conversation about travel plans and career changes, topics that felt refreshingly normal after the intensity of Michelle's ultimatums. For the first time in weeks, I found myself thinking about possibilities rather than problems. Emma extended her stay in Asheville to help me review Michelle's settlement terms, and what we discovered confirmed every suspicion about her generous offer. The financial arrangements would have left me essentially bankrupt, while she retained full ownership of assets I'd helped build over 8 years of marriage. The legal documents had been crafted to appear fair on the surface, while systematically stripping away any claim I might have to property or investments we'd accumulated together. 3 weeks later, I returned to Denver with Emma and a counterproposal that addressed the financial fraud Michelle had committed. My attorney had uncovered evidence of the forged loan documents and unauthorized transfers that constituted criminal violations beyond simple marital misconduct. Michelle's theft of marital assets had created legal complications that her original settlement offer had completely ignored. The house in Highlands Ranch looked smaller when I returned, like a place I'd visited long ago rather than somewhere I'd lived for years. Michelle and Ryan had already begun renovating the master bedroom, installing a crib and changing table in the space where I'd slept beside my wife for 8 years. The casual erasure of my presence felt symbolic of how icily she'd written me out of her life. Michelle was shocked to see me back, especially with an attorney in tow and legal documents that exposed her financial crimes. The confident woman who demanded my signature at the mountain cabin was replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened about the consequences of her actions. Ryan stood behind her in our kitchen, wearing an expression of barely contained anger that I had disrupted their carefully laid plans. "David, let's be reasonable about this," Ryan said, stepping forward like he was mediating a business dispute rather than addressing the man whose wife he'd impregnated. "Michelle made some mistakes with the finances, but we can work out a payment plan to resolve those issues. No need to involve criminal attorneys or make this more complicated than necessary." The The suggestion that Michelle's systematic theft was merely a mistake requiring a payment plan revealed how little respect either of them had for the damage they'd caused. They were treating felony fraud like an accounting error that could be resolved with better bookkeeping and monthly installments. Emma presented Michelle with evidence of her financial crimes and a settlement offer that reflected actual legal reality. Either Michelle could agree to equitable asset division and restitution for the stolen funds, or we would pursue criminal charges that could result in jail time and complete forfeiture of her business assets. Michelle's face went white as she read through the evidence Emma had compiled. Bank records, forged documents, email communications discussing the theft of marital assets. Every transaction had been documented with the thoroughness of someone who understood that financial crimes leave permanent trails. "I was going to pay it back," Michelle said weakly, the confident businesswoman persona crumbling under legal scrutiny. "The money was just temporary loans from our joint accounts. I always intended to replace everything once the divorce was finalized." The claim that theft constituted temporary borrowing was legally meaningless, and we all knew it. Michelle had systematically stolen from joint accounts to fund her affair and pregnancy with Ryan, using forged documents and deceptive practices that went far beyond marital disagreements about spending. Ryan tried to maintain his composed demeanor, but sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized that his relationship with Michelle had legal consequences extending beyond divorce proceedings. His name appeared on several financial documents as a beneficiary of Michelle's theft, making him potentially liable as an accessory to her crimes. 2 months later, Michelle signed a settlement agreement that restored most of the stolen assets and provided fair division of property accumulated during our marriage. The house would be sold with proceeds split equally. Her business assets would be evaluated for my contribution to their development, and she would face probationary supervision for the financial crimes rather than jail time. Ryan distanced himself from Michelle once the legal complications became clear, apparently deciding that their grand romance wasn't worth potential criminal liability. The pregnancy that had seemed like the foundation of their future together became an inconvenient reminder of his involvement with someone facing fraud charges. Emma and I traveled to Savannah that spring, exploring historic squares and waterfront restaurants while Michelle dealt with the consequences of her choices. The time we spent together felt easy and uncomplicated, built on honesty rather than hidden agendas. Emma appreciated directness and authenticity, qualities that Michelle had always criticized as insufficiently romantic or spontaneous. 6 months after the anniversary dinner that ended my marriage, I received news that Michelle had given birth to a daughter. She was raising the child alone, Ryan having relocated to another state for what he called career opportunities, but which seemed more like escape from the complications Michelle's legal troubles had created. I felt no sadness about missing the birth or being excluded from the child's life. The baby represented Michelle's choices and Ryan's abandonment, a reminder of relationships built on deception rather than genuine connection. My future lay in different directions, with people who valued honesty over convenience. Emma and I were married in a simple ceremony in Maui 2 years later, surrounded by friends who knew our real story rather than carefully curated versions designed to manage perceptions. The wedding felt authentic and joyful, celebrating a relationship built on mutual respect rather than strategic advantages. Standing on the beach where we exchanged vows, I thought briefly about the anniversary dinner that had ended my first marriage. Michelle's pregnancy announcement had felt like the end of everything I'd built, but it had actually been the beginning of a life that aligned with my values rather than someone else's agenda. Waves rolled steadily against the Hawaiian shore, while Emma and I made promises we intended to keep, surrounded by people who celebrated our happiness without hidden motives or competing loyalties. 8 years of marriage to Michelle had taught me to recognize authentic connection when I found it, and I was grateful for the lesson despite the painful way I'd learned it. That evening, as Emma and I walked along the moonlit beach, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Michelle, sending a photo of her daughter's first birthday party. The message included an apology for everything that had happened and a request to meet sometime to discuss the possibility of friendship. I deleted the message without responding and turned off my phone. Some chapters end completely, and attempting To revise them only diminishes the stories that follow. Michelle belonged to my past, and Emma represented my future. The choice between them wasn't difficult anymore. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen.
If this.
One hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.